self-diagnosis and the 2x2 matrix. We'll cover that later in the presentation. So as a reminder, we are building our knowledge on the 2,300 verses that the Bible talks about money that we kind of mentioned in week 1. And 40% of Jesus' parables are built on wealth. And so all our understanding, all our knowledge, the things that we're covering are built on an understanding of the Bible. Last week, just a typo I had this verse up here. I won't read through it. I accidentally had Matthew 15 was up on the screen, but it's actually Matthew 25. So anyone that's following along, yes, that was a typo. It was Matthew 25, not 15. Another thing I want to kind of mention is discernment. So I was having a conversation with somebody, and we were talking about, well, if we're going to give money and we give it to an organization or we give it to maybe a government organization or politicians or people, so how do we know where they're going to use it for good? You know, we don't trust necessarily everybody to give our money to. We were talking about California government, how they raised money for the homes that burnt down, and then it all disappeared. Right? They spent it all on something, nobody knows what. And so you have to definitely use discernment on when you decide, am I going to help somebody, or am I going to help this organization? You know, some people you give them, we talked about this last week a little bit, but somebody might be in need, but giving them money might be the worst thing you could do for them, because they might use that for selfish reasons or sinful reasons. Versus if you're hungry, I'll give you food. Doesn't always mean I'm not gonna, I might help you help you in a monetary value, but just always have discernment. Always pray about it, right? We trust our churches, we trust our pastors, right? So just always have discernment. It doesn't mean we're just gonna go give money to everybody and anybody we come across, right? But we're gonna pray about it and have some discernment around that. So this week we're talking about chapter 4 and 5. So 4 is looking at trends and movements in generosity. So far we've covered up to this point principles in which we believe are driven by the 2,300 verses. We went over that last week, the different 7 principles, or the principles there. We learned how giving is good from both a moral and a medical or health perspective. We covered that last time. And so now we're going to look into the studies that show a decline in Christian Americans and giving trends. Here you have a study done by the State of Giving, the Empty Tomb Inc. Right? And it's hard to, might be, or you can see it easier there than I can here. So you'll see back in 1916, right, the percentage of American Protestant incomes given to the church was just under 3% of their income. Then in 1933, it went up a little bit to just over 3.5%, and then it slowly declined. Then 3.5, and then 2006, a little over 2.5. So just a slight decline in the amount of giving Protestant-based incomes were giving to churches, right, over the generations. You kind of see that decline. An additional study was done by Christian Smith and Hillary Davidson at the University of Notre Dame, and what they found out was less than 3% of American adults give away 10% or more of their income. Right, so less than 3% of adults, or Christian adults, give away less than 10%, give away 10% or more. Right, if you look at this chart here, right, this is charitable giving by percent of income by income bracket. So if someone makes $10,000 a year and they give away 50%, right, they're top of the list versus someone who makes $1 million a year and gives away 10%. It's not about the dollar amount they were giving, it's about percentage of their salary they were giving. If you look along the bottom, it's kind of hard to see, but the left vertical is the percentage, the bottom is how much the person or the family made. So on the bottom, you have $5,000 to $10,000 a year in giving, or how much they made, $5,000 to $10,000 a year. And you can see the percentage was a little over 2.5%. And then as they make more money, 10 to 15, 15 to 20K, 20 to 30K, you see the lines start to go down. So as people made more income, their giving got less and less and less to about a 80 to 100K, dropped all the way down to 1.5% of their income, right, on average. And then there's a bump, something about over 100K. People gave just a little bit more, right? But you see that trend. The more money people make, the less and less they give. Right? So America has maybe a generosity problem. So why are giving patterns so bad? Could be several reasons. One of them maybe is that maybe Christians don't know that their wealth belongs to God, right? They don't think that their wealth belongs to God. It belongs to themselves, and we're the main character, and God's a secondary character possibly in our life. Maybe they don't know that we should be generous with their giving, right? This is not always taught in church, that we should be generous with our giving and that God owns all of our wealth. And it could be possibly that Christians know this, but we don't know how to actually implement these in practice. How do you tactically do that when you got to pay bills and you got to take care of this and take care of that? And that's what the book and what we'll go into kind of covers. So there could be many reasons for that, but those are probably the three most common ones, right? And there's barriers to obedience, right? Some of these barriers are supported by our culture. There might be lack of knowledge of how do you give, possibly, right? We live in a consumerist culture. It's all about one's personal wealth, right? Accumulating more and more and more, and then we end up attaching to our wealth rather than being grateful for God and His provisions. Right? Barriers to entrance and barriers to obedience might be excessive worry about providing for one's family, right, and saving for the future. And that's a normal, that might be a normal worry. Or you're trying to figure out how am I going to provide, how are we going to save for the future, right? And we're still trying to please God. Right? There might be issues around significant sin around selfishness or materialism. Right, where it's not about God at all. It's all about more and more and more and more and more. Right? And then there might be a lack of compassion for the poor. Right? As you increase in wealth, as we saw in the previous weeks, right, wealth tends to make people mean, or maybe lose a lack of compassion for the poor. So at Oxford, right, the authors found this interesting, and we're looking at different surveys and around wealth. And a survey was done called Passing the Plate that showed that the most generous 25% of church members gave a 90% of the total of funds taken by the church. So the most generous 25% of church members gave 90% of what the church needed, or funds taken in by the church. Right? And this, again, was by percentage of income, not based on the actual dollar amount that was given. So they took it a little bit further. They wanted to see, based on these studies, that kind of the results of studies I showed you, right, and they did an informal survey across their Harvard alumni, which will come back to what that consisted of. But what they found was some of the other charts I showed you, right? In general, Americans give less than 3% of their income out to charity, right? Wealthy Americans give less than 3% income. So-called Christian Americans give less than 3% of their income. And I put Christians in quotes. They have it in quotes here, in that people that say they're Christian, but they don't really go to church all the time. Maybe they go once, during Easter and Christmas. And then you have church-going Christian Americans, right? Somewhere between 5 to 8%, more towards the 8%, which is good to see, right? People that actually go to church, gave more. And then an informal survey of wealthy, devoted Christians gave over 10%. So it's kind of interesting. The closer you are to God, it seems to be the more you give, right? Because the top row there would be non-Christians. And as you move down, quote Christian Americans, then church-going Christian Americans, and then wealthy, devoted Christians, you start to see a tendency that the closer, it seems to be informal, that the closer you are to God, the more money you tend to give. So Christian business leaders, right? So a survey was sent out, the one I was just talking about, to 200 individuals across the Harvard alumni. And it had two objectives. Objective one, understand how higher income Christians think about and manage their wealth giving today. Right? How do higher earning Christians think about their wealth today? And then objective two, test the ideas explored in this book, which we'll talk about tonight. Question? Test, test. There we go.
I just think with number two, our culture, it's so different. I mean, like I'm 68. I remember a time just when we there was times that I don't remember that we didn't have things. You know what I'm saying? I thought we were always rich because my father went out and did stuff with us in the yard or took us. He had girls and he took us fishing every. But now it's like you have TikTok, you have Facebook, and everybody sees everybody doing everything, and then everybody else has to do it, or so and so's got it, so I need it, and that, and I just, it's like a long time ago. My sister told me because my boys, I didn't buy them name brand clothes. She said, you have to buy, because she bought her daughter everything, everything. And I said, I do. It's called Wrangler jeans, it's called Hanes t shirts, they're name brands. And that, and unfortunately, my niece, she's passed because she just with all this stuff, everything given to her, she got into a bad lifestyle, and that, and I think it's because everything was given to her. She didn't want for anything, or she didn't learn how to do without. You know what I'm saying? I think that sometimes people look at people like, they're poor or something like that. And maybe it's not, but like those people that have 8 kids, those kids probably don't know that there's eight. I mean, they probably do know, but they probably don't know there's 8 kids. They get fed, they get loved, they get, so for them, it's not a concept of having, it's just a concept of having anything. Because I just think with this society that everybody's just so TikTok and everything, and it's crazy. And I think kids see way too much stuff, and those people on there are crazy.
Yeah. And you're right about the TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, because Instagram's all about look at me and my lifestyle and my trip, and then other people are trying to copy that. And then when you look sometimes behind the scenes, you realize they're not happy. It's not really like that. It's just something you put on for show, and they put on for show and stuff. It's like trying to be like the Joneses. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other discussion questions? All right. With that, that ends week 3. Yeah. Let me go back.
I don't want that. I don't want it.
All right. So number 4, what gives you joy rather than obligation?
So what gives you joy is when you see the happiness that it might bring someone else, or the results that might transpire from
Yeah.
somebody else receiving something, or the spark in their face, or
Yeah.
different things like that that'll gives you joy in knowing that you contributed.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, the joy that you get from seeing the results of your giving. And that one, I think the book mentions this later, in that Jesus says recognition here on earth is your reward. And so I know sometimes in the past when we've given, and I've said, don't tell anybody it's for me because I don't want that recognition here. But I forgot what verse it was, right? Jesus says, recognition, you'll get recognition in heaven, but if you get rewarded here and everyone says, hey, good job and attaboy, then Jesus says, then that's your reward, right? You got your reward here. So even when, to your point, I like seeing that reaction. I remember once we funded somebody, and when we were at another church, we funded somebody to go on a mission trip because they wanted to go and they couldn't afford it. and we couldn't go, so we had paid for somebody else's ticket, and they were so excited, so happy. But yeah, to your point, that brought us joy, just seeing that reaction. Yeah. Yeah, but they don't have to know it came from us, right? Because their happiness, yeah, and their excitement, yeah, when they got back, and yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah, when they don't know. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you get joy from that, yeah. And I could see where that becomes addicting, because it's like, and then you just want to keep doing more and more of it.
My opinion of the first one, that everything belongs to God, is yes, everything belongs to God, because He gives you the breath of life. He gives you the ability to learn, and then you apply that knowledge and you make a living. And out of that, you give back to God.
Yeah.
And the Bible, I think it says that you are you were born naked, and naked you live. In other words, everything is going to stay here. We don't take anything. We don't have no purpose to take anything anyway. So
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point. And yeah, there's a couple of verses we covered a couple weeks ago where it's exactly what you said. God gives us the skills to build the wealth, so it all belongs to Him, right? Everything belongs to Him, because you're right. He gave us the skills, the ability to accumulate that wealth. And yeah, we came in the world naked. We're going to leave naked. Nothing's going with us. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. All right. Yeah. 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 Less worries, less responsibilities. Yeah. 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 When the internet came, yeah. Yeah.